Okay, we're back. Part two of this show, I have Dr. Levan Scott. And Levan Scott is the assistant to the superintendent for the Fort Wayne Community School System. Dr. Scott, I want to thank you for coming on the show. First of all, how long have you been associated with the Fort Wayne Community School System?
I've been with the Fort Wayne Community School System 24 years.
Okay. So, what was the educational climate those 24 years ago?
Quite different than what it is at present. Rather unusual that I'm here, and one of the reasons I'm in education is because of that climate. I came to Fort Wayne in 1951. I was here on business. I was in the insurance business. I was a manager of the Mammoth Life Insurance Company, and Fort Wayne was one of my territories.
Right.
And I had some agents up here, and I came here, and while I was here, I decided to do a little exploring in terms of trying to do some things that I found wasn't happening. So I went to the Urban League and asked the Urban League if they would intercede for me for a position at Harvester. And I applied for a position in personnel work out there in 1951.
Okay.
That was something unheard of. But I went out and interviewed, and evidently they believed what I told them, and they told me they would give me an opportunity. I went into Harvester and I worked throughout the plant, and the following summer they called me to the office and gave me a job in personnel. And I worked in personnel for Harvester for 2 years, which enabled me to learn a great deal about Fort Wayne.
Okay.
The possibilities here, the kind of people that were here, some of the problems that were inherent with blacks. At the end of 2 years, I asked for a promotion into their industrial relations department, and because I was black primarily, and because I only had 2 years education, they refused. But they were kind enough to give me a leave of absence so that I could go back to college and get my education. I took that leave of absence and went back to school, and as a result, I became involved in PTA work because I had 2 daughters in school, and my wife was president of a PTA. This exposed me to the educational setting. There were a couple things that I learned that was quite crucial and played a great role in terms of me going back to school, changing my major and going into education. One was that black kids were being cheated and were not being given the kind of education that they deserved, that there were a lot of bigots and a lot of racism in our educational system, and that we were doing very little about it. From the standpoint that we were not participating, from the standpoint that we were certainly not professionally trying to change the system internally. So I decided to become a part of the system. So I went back to college, got my bachelor's in elementary ed, because I believe that that's where the action is. That if you're going to do anything with boys and girls, that's where it is.
Do it early. Right. Okay.
And after I'd finished, I looked around for a place to practice my profession, and I said, Fort Wayne is the place for me. There were 2 reasons. One was that certainly there was a deficit in the number of blacks that was participating in education. At that time, I think there were 1 or 2 black teachers. I don't think there were any black males. And I said, that's where I want to go, because I think I can write my own ticket. I can do anything I want to do.
Do something about it. Yeah.
So that's why I'm here in Fort Wayne.
Okay. Okay. What was your first position then with Fort Wayne Community Schools?
My first position was a teacher. I taught at Harmer Elementary School.
Okay.
For I think 5 years.
Okay. Now, during the 60s, and I would say the 60s, pre-busing, what kind of changes did the system go through as far as black students and minority learning and all that?
Well, I think during the 60s and in the early 70s, Fort Wayne went through some of the same kind of pain and some of the same kind of turmoil that you found all over the country, simply because I think that people here were learning from what was being done elsewhere. As a result of the 60s and the 70s, we came out of that turmoil with a desegregated high school and middle school.
Okay.
We have still to desegregate our elementary schools.
Okay. Right.
I think we came out of that turmoil also with a greater participation and maybe an awareness on the part of blacks of their share, of the share needed for them in terms of getting a major kind of result from education.
Okay. Busing, was it necessary in Fort Wayne?
Well, I wouldn't say it was necessary, but certainly that was the alternative. In fact, that's one of the major alternatives that has been found all over the country,
Yeah.
to bring about integration or desegregation. We found ourselves engaged in a major busing effort
Right.
to desegregate our middle schools and high schools. One of the reasons that we haven't desegregated our elementary schools is because of the adverse feeling that not only the black community but also the white community has regarding busing elementary students.
Did that increase the quality of education, the busing, you think?
You know, when you raise a question about the quality of education, that's a dangerous kind of thing to kind of, to even exercise and answer in terms of the question. I think it provided an experience that both black kids and white kids need in terms of the kind of real world that they're going to live in. I think it's ridiculous to expect a black kid or a white kid to go to school in an all black or all white school and come out into the real world and expect them to cope. And that basically is the kind of experience that I think that busing or integration or desegregation provides a plus factor for it.
Okay. What kind of progress do you think the Fort Wayne Community School System, since it is the biggest system in Allen County, what kind of strides do you think it's made toward the hiring of minority teachers and faculty and things?
Well, no doubt we have made some strides. I certainly can see the strides that have been made since I've been here 20-some years, starting from almost zero to now we have about 117 blacks on the staff.
Okay.
We have black administrators, black principals. We haven't arrived, though. The thing that bothers me in the kind of world we live in, America, also Fort Wayne, that we have to think in terms of numbers when we look at people. And education hasn't, we haven't been able to get over that hurdle. We still equate the number of blacks that we hire in a ratio basis,
right,
in terms of how many white administrators, how many white teachers we have in comparison to the number of black teachers.
Right.
Why we have to do this, I don't know. I simply think that we ought to be equating the hiring of blacks and also whites in terms of the kind of role models and the needs of the population that we're trying to address ourselves. Right. It's ridiculous to think in terms of one black teachers
Versus.
in a high school or in an elementary school, and expecting that to provide a role model for the white students or black students.
Okay.
And until we reach a kind of level of thinking in terms of the needs of the students rather than in terms of the needs of those people who are making decisions,
All right.
then we will have arrived and start being productive in education.
Okay. One thing I wanted to ask you about, too, is that just recently they decided to close McCulloch Elementary, and a few years ago we lost Hannah and Harmer. In the long run, 10, 15 years from now, is that going to have any kind of effect on students, the fact that they have to leave home, leave their general area to go to school? You think that's going to have any problems with them?
I really don't.
Okay.
I've heard this, and I'm sure there are parents that believe, and there are those who would disagree with me. I think the most viable and the most flexible commodity we have in the schools are students. I think parents have more problems with the changes that are made than students do. And I think that anything that we can do, and I think most of the things that we've done in the Fort Wayne Community School in terms of closing schools or staff changes have been done in terms of meeting the instructional and educational needs for boys and girls. Closing those schools that you talked about, I think, will be advantageous to the instruction and the education of those students.
Okay. What can we look for in the future for Fort Wayne Community Schools, black students, education?
Oh, I think we can look for much change. There is no doubt in my mind that we're getting a different kind of black student coming into our educational institution. We have a different kind of black parent. We have a black parent whose experience has not been all bad. Their educational experience, they recognize the need for a good education, and I think the system is very bright. Fort Wayne is becoming more and more populated with young blacks who have been to college, been to university, are continuing to go to school, and professionally coming back here and are looking and demanding a piece of the action.
Well, that's good. That is definitely good. Dr. Scott, I want to thank you for coming on the show and giving us a little insight to the educational history of Black Fort Wayne. It's been very informative. I want to thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, that's going to just about do it for this edition of A New Generation. Again, this is part one. I invite you to stay tuned for part two next week. We have tried to go over some things that I think are interesting, but more important, informative. And we hope that everybody out there gets something out of it. So until we see you again for A New Generation, I'm your host, Steve Miller. Thank you, and good night.